Good evening and welcome to another edition of Addiction Talk. My guest, I remember him from my days of college. And when you hear his story, you will definitely remember him too. Take a listen. Lee Steinberg is a legendary sports agent who has represented some of the biggest names in professional sports. He is known for securing record setting contracts and building athletes into standalone brands. In 1996, Steinberg became a household name after the hit blockbuster Jerry Maguire depicted him as the real life inspiration for the movie's lead character. Despite his success, Steinberg faced personal struggles with alcohol addiction and almost lost it all. Since finding recovery in 2010, Steinberg has made a comeback. Today, he is the best-selling author, entrepreneur, and chairman of Lee Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Holdings. Addiction Talk starts now. And joining us all the way from California is Lee Steinberg. Lee, I know before we started on this, you showed me the view from your window, and I am like jealous. You're overlooking the ocean. It's not fair, I tell you. But thank you for joining us.
You know, I could live in a ramshackle hovel with a couple sticks as long as I could see the ocean.
Yeah, I can imagine. It just is kind of a calming and soothing effect that you get to experience every day.
Right.
And so, as we were just sitting there listening to your story, I have to ask you, how often do people come up to you remembering from the movie Jerry Maguire? I know it was 1996, and I think I was in college during that time. I'm aging myself, but I still remember that iconic phrase, show me the money, show me the money, you know?
Every time I go out to dinner or walk through an airport for the last 25, 30 years, someone's run up and either said those four words or asked me to say those four words that start with show me the. And, but I think the film humanized sports agents.
And when you think about the film, a lot of us, whether we saw it in 1996, and I know it's been played continuously over the years, was it an accurate depiction of your life at that time?
It's not biographical because I started in 1975 with the first pick in the first round overall in the NFL draft, and we got the largest rookie contract. So that doesn't make a great story of conflict and triumph. But Cameron Crowe called me up, who's the director writer in 1993, and asked if he could follow me wherever I went for a film that would feature a sports agent. And so he went to the NFL draft with me where I had the first pick. He went to the league meetings, to USC for pro scouting day, went to a number of games, Super Bowls, and I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. And then he wrote a script, and I had to vet the script to make sure that what holds you in a movie, which is dialogue that seems real and a look that seems real, didn't get frustrated. And I took an actor, Cuba Gooding Jr., with me down to the Super Bowl and made him pretend he was a wide receiver client of mine all week, and to put him in character. And I actually had to show the quarterback in the film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral because he had gone to NYU, Joy, and they didn't have a football program there. So it really changed my life and recognition factor.
Mm-hmm. So, what was it like being this public, sports icon, sports agent icon, and also at the same time, at some point, battling an addiction and people realizing that?
So people are always aspiring to have presence and profile and to be famous, as it were. And what they don't realize is the opposite side of that, which is that if I got arrested for drunk driving, it was in newspapers around the world. I had to deal with the embarrassment to my children. And so I had had a very charmed life and major success, not only in representing athletes. We had 64 first round draft picks in the NFL and the very first pick in the first round in 8 different years, and baseball and basketball and boxing. But I came to a point where my father died a long death from esophageal cancer. And he was the rock joy in my life. He was the one source of stability. And then my 2 boys were diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which is an eye disease that meant they would be blind. And then we lost a house in a beach city to mold. Now, none of that is in the way of excuses. I should have chosen something else, but it's just to explain the environment. I felt overwhelmed like Gulliver on the beach, tethered down by Lilliputians, and these things were happening to myself and my family, and I couldn't seem to protect them. And I turned to alcohol. And I hadn't been a lifelong big drinker. There was no alcohol in our family when I grew up. Nobody else in our family is an alcoholic. And they used to call me One Beer Steinberg because that was my capacity. But as I got later into life, by the time I got into my late 50s and early 60s, I'm living proof that you don't have to have genetics or heredity. You don't have to come out of an alcoholic household. You just can get there by not watching your drinking and drinking too much until the cravings become overwhelming.
Which is so interesting because not only like you didn't have the family history, but most of your life you were not a drinker. And then all of a sudden you're thrown into these challenges in life, like you mentioned, the home, your children losing, your father, and you find yourself turning to alcohol to cope. Did you ever in a million years, just looking at your history, think this could happen to me?
No, I didn't. I didn't really understand alcoholism and how the cravings for alcohol rewire your brain and how they defy all logic. So logically, if someone said behind door one is happy family, great reputation, great economic principles, great making a difference in the world, and behind door two is arrests and devastation of your body and losing relationships and losing a business, who would willingly pick door two? But the alcohol became in control of my brain, and I had a illness, and that fits all the classical definitions of illness. It's chronic, it's progressive, and I just didn't understand well enough what was happening to me, and so I went to a series of rehabs. I could write the Fodor's Guide to Rehabs, but at the end of the day, nothing worked until finally I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to a unique fellowship. Oh my God, I'm about to be executed.
It's okay. I know it's helped a lot of people, so you can definitely say Alcoholics Anonymous on this podcast for sure.
You're not supposed to discuss it publicly, but I went to a unique fellowship and worked a 12-step program. And the first thing I had to do was surrender to the concept that I was no longer in control and that this alcohol was controlling me. And then I found that unique fellowship, so I needed next to find a sponsor to take me through the 12 steps. And then I went through the 12 steps one at a time. And then I read all the literature, and I found my concept of a higher power who became in control, as it were, with my life. And then ultimately, I tried to reach out to other people. So the reason I've been public about this and post every 6 months how many years or days I have is in the hope that if someone else is out there despondent, confused, depressed, behind problems that come from addictive substances, that they'll find there is hope.
Mm.
Because the hardest thing to do in the midst of all that destruction and detritus is to believe that there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's there was a Greek god named Sisyphus who pushed a huge boulder up a hill, and
Mhm.
that was his destiny. And every time he would push it up a couple steps, it would roll back a step. And that's what recovery can be like, which is that the fact that you're stopped drinking doesn't mean that all the financial problems, all the relationship problems have gone away. But this time, in the past, I had told people when I came out of recovery, I've got it this time. This
Mm.
time it's different. And you didn't mean to actually lie. It's just that the result ended up being a lie. And this time I didn't say a thing about my status to anybody. And all I did was stack up days of sobriety because I figured the only thing people wanted to see from me was not words, but action.
Actions. No,
And
I have to ask you something because you've kind of walked us through this journey that you went on, but I want to go back because you said so many things that I think will benefit people. That this is a progressive disease. So how did it progress for you? Did it start out, you go from one beer Steinberg, you go through this trauma of losing so much or feeling that there's loss in your life and things are out of control. How did it start to escalate?
so at that point, my marriage starts to break up for reasons that predated alcohol. And I left my kids with my wife and separated and moved into my own apartment. Well, I had never lived that way, really. I had been with a family for a long time. Even in college, I lived in the dorm and international house. So this was uh, a different environment. I was depressed. And I found out, Joy, that you can do something legally, which I never did before, which is to drink while it was the light of day. And so, and that allowed me, because I had been a late night drinker, and that allowed me to get a higher level of alcohol content up and to suffer more consequences than before. So it escalated when I moved in on my own, and I felt horrible being separated from my children. I knew that they didn't ask to be born. We bring them on this planet, and what we owe them is a sense of security, a sense of unconditional love, and I couldn't provide that. My dad had raised me with two core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. So the way to judge yourself was I a good son, a good father, a good brother? Was I good to my friends when it cost me something to be a friend? And then the second was make a positive difference in the world and help people who couldn't help themselves and try to heal pain. So that was what was really important to me. And I realized I was falling down on both counts. And eventually I had a moment of epiphany, a moment of clarity. And what happened was I reintroduced proportionality to my life. And I said, wait a minute, I'm sitting here on my father's bed in
Mm.
West Los Angeles, and my only thought is, where can I find more vodka? And there, but wait a second, I'm not a starving peasant in South Sudan. I don't have the last name Steinberg in Nazi Germany in the 30s. I don't have cancer. I'm not sick in any way. So, what excuse do I have not to live up to those core values and not to get back to being a good friend and a good father and rebuild a business which I had closed?
Mhm. But it took you a while to get there. I know as we were talking beforehand, there was like this 5-year process of you struggling in there. Was there denial ever a part of this? And was that the first moment of having that epiphany on the bed? Like, what am I doing? This isn't me.
It was like moving into an alternative persona, where all the things that had been critically important to me were blurred by the haze of alcohol and drinking. And I had lost my way, and denial is a big part of that. In other words, I didn't understand what was happening to my brain, but I was contributing to it in a profound way. And eventually, the whole question of volition and being able to control goes out the window, because the brain gets rewired. And so instead of the frontal lobe of your brain being the decision-making process, it goes to the old lizard brain, the amygdala, and eventually convinces your brain that the cravings for alcohol are as important as breathing, going to the bathroom, all the autonomic responses that someone would have. And so I would sit, Joy, in front of my condo, and I'd say, today I am not going to drink. Tonight I'm going to be sober. And I was really firm in that. And somehow my car drove itself to the liquor store and went and bought a big bottle of vodka. And like in an instant, I was home sitting there with a big bottle of vodka when I had sworn I wasn't going to drink that day.
Mm. That just shows how powerful, this brain disease. And many people don't think of addiction as a brain disease, but it really is. And I love how you described how it takes over the brain, the impulses to want to do that. And I'm wondering, how are you managing even your agency or your career at this point? Because you're sitting there, you're telling yourself, I want to do better, but yet you're struggling in all these areas. How are you even keeping all of the parts together?
Because I didn't drink at work. I just didn't go in as often. And there started to be lost days where I was too impaired to go in. And the hard part of all of this is that your best skills work against you. You become a clever alcoholic. So people tried to help me. They took my wallet, they took my keys to my car. So I'm sitting in my condo. I don't have any money, anything else, but I could walk down to the supermarket below and get a bottle of vodka and say, you know me, I come here pretty much every day. I forgot my wallet at home. And they would let me walk out of the store with a bottle because of the sincerity of the rest of it. Well, people were trying to help me, and the sickness of alcoholism was making the cleverness of that so self-destructive.
Mm-hmm. What toll do you think this took on you before you had that epiphany moment, and after going to rehab after rehab and finally finding recovery? How did it affect your career at that time? How did it affect your relationships? How did it even affect your, getting DUIs and other things that started happening?
So at a certain point, I realized that I had a fiduciary responsibility to my clients. They hadn't signed up for this. So I gave the agency to younger agents and stopped representing athletes. And then ultimately, when I realized I was in total crisis, I shut down my condo and moved back in with my parents at the age of 61 in West Los Angeles. And then it had an impact, especially on my relationship with my middle son, who really didn't want to talk to me. He was so disillusioned and disappointed. So that became alienated. My other two kids were stuck with me, but again, we bring children into this world. It's not my kids' responsibility that their father was impaired. So it affected everything. I shut my practice down. I shut my house down. I was alienated from one of my three children. And again, when I had a DUI in 2007, it went into newspapers everywhere. And at a certain point, you have to hit a bottom. And many times I would hit what I thought was a bottom, where the consequences were so overwhelming that it seemed like it would shake me into action. But it didn't, because I still had things around me and my practice around me, and things seemed normal to the world because I wasn't showing this to people except for the occasional arrest. And there was, when I had the DUI in 2007, I hit a fire hydrant. And the next day, there are news crews out looking at the fire hydrant because it's such a, to them, interesting story. And it ran on all the news. Well, you know, that's pretty painful. I had been really careful in how I interacted with people, how I treated them, making sure that I never did harm and everything. And now, what had once been extreme care, my parents raised me so if I offended someone, I'd run down the street to try to apologize to them. And now all of a sudden I'm in this altered state. So the most important thing in my life became getting sober. And people have talked to me about my comeback and the representation of athletes and doing the biggest contracts. My comeback has been maintaining sobriety for 13 and a half years and being a good father to my kids.
Why do you describe that as a comeback and as one of your biggest comebacks? Because some people don't, I think they hear your story, but they may not even understand just the challenge and the daily walk that you have to deal with to maintain sobriety. This isn't you're not cured, you know, it's not like you go to rehab or you go to AA and all of a sudden you're cured and you never have to deal with this again.
You know what? I look at it that I have, every person is allocated a certain amount of alcohol that they can have in a healthy way. I've drunk all mine. It's gone. So I will have this altered brain pattern for the rest of my life. And if I've heard so many stories of alcoholics who were sober for a while and then figured, oh, one drink won't hurt. And what they did is reignite the pilot light on in their brain, and they went right back, not to beginning drinking, but to the depths they descended to at the worst of their drinking. So it's something I'm aware of daily. I still go to meetings.
To this day, you still go to meetings?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've got a home group. I go to meetings. I've spoken across the country to groups from New York to Minnesota. I'm constantly aware, and like I said, I try to be of service to a whole bunch of people in addition to sponsoring by speaking publicly about it, because what life would I be waiting for to try to be of help to other people? This is a reality in my life. It's part of me. And
you ever feel shame about it? Is it still sometimes challenging to talk about it? Or have you gotten to the point now that you can just talk about it with anyone? Or do you still feel sometimes that there's a stigma or shame out there?
You know, I don't really care about that. I mean, we have this one lifetime, and I wouldn't judge people who judge alcoholism because I didn't understand what it was before it hit me. And I might too have been tempted to say, you know, why don't you just have more willpower? Why don't you stop? Well, I think I've had a little bit of willpower in the rest of my life. It's not about willpower. Once you have pickled your brain, you're not turning back into a cucumber. And so it's a process that you have to live with and manage. And look, here's the thing, Joy. If it takes an hour a day to do recovery related activities, and that gives me freedom for the other 23 hours to live well. I think it's a amazingly good trait.
I do too. And when I think about you talking about going to AA meetings and having a recovery strategy, if you spend an hour a day, what other things have helped you? Because I'm sure life still throws those curveballs. You know, it could be a loss of a friend or anything can happen to us. So, how do you cope now that you didn't know how to do before?
One of the things I saw was people in that unique fellowship who dealt with issues far more serious than I've ever had. And I watched how they walked through it. So I watched people who lost their kids to addiction. I watched people who had cancer. I watched people who went through all sorts of awful diseases and everything. And you know what? They went through the experience and didn't drink over it. And there's an expression called halt, which means if you're hungry, eat, don't drink. If you're angry, calm down, don't drink. If you're lonely, call a friend. If you're tired, that's not a setup. So I watched people live through the most uh, really difficult situation, losing their children, dealing with cancer, dealing with all sorts of diseases, and somehow their spiritual center was
Mm.
strong enough and their adherence to the steps was strong enough that they marched through it. And so it's not that I've never faced challenges, but I'm acutely aware of how the tape plays out. That what
Mm.
you think of as one drink, you have to go through in your mind how that plays out, because that would become a whole sequence of drinking, and at the end of it, you'd end up right back. And guess what? It's been 13 and a half years. I'm not giving them back.
I like that strategy that you said that you play the tape forward. So when you have a struggle or a hard time or something comes up, you play that tape forward and say, if I take this drink now, here's where I'm going to be 10 days from now or a year from now. I think that's a great coping strategy. And you even said grounding yourself by believing in a higher power or some type of faith. Is there anything else? Do you have self care practices? Are you a yoga person? Are there any other things that you do that ground you and also remind you of your recovery and the importance it is in your life?
So I think it's important to exercise. I work out with a personal trainer 3 times a week. I have a Fitbit and I'm very competitive. So I try to do 15,000 steps a day. There's a process called hyperbaric oxygen, which is really healing for the body. It's also anti-aging, but I try to take care of myself and make sure that I'm not tired, I'm not hungry. I take care of basic needs, which are setups to having reduced ability to find balance. And I've fought with low-level depression in my life, and I take an antidepressant, and so I try to take all that seriously, but to do those things, and I am friends with other alcoholics, and we keep sort of in touch, and it's a great group because if you miss a meeting, they're on the phone
On
asking
the
you,
phone,
where were you?
that accountability.
Yeah,
Well,
what
we know that accountability in recovery is so important. And you know, one of the things I wanted to ask you is how and when did you know you would rebuild your career? Because we talk about, you know, you get to this point of recovery and you're in this. When did you know and how did you know that you know, that this wasn't the end for you, even though you went through all of this, that you could rebuild the life that you had?
So part of it was talking through all the challenging questions that would occur on reentry. So I knew I had dominated sports representation and done it with charity and community. and worked with athletes for role models. I knew I could do that. And if I did it once, I could do it again. My challenge was, could I remain sober? So the first thing I did is I waited a couple of years, so that, again, on the theory that it's not describing the condition, but people seeing that you were sober for 3 years. So I waited 3 years. And then I carefully confronted every question that might come if I deal with parents of athletes. How can you guarantee us that you will stay sober?
Did you ever get that question? Did people ask that when you came back?
They ask every question. You don't have a divine right to represent athletes, but you have to prepare for every question. You didn't seem to do such a great job managing your own money. How will you manage our kids? Well, I'm not. You're older now and you've been out of it for a while. Are you still relevant? Do you still have relationships with people? And chronologically, you're old. Will you be around for my son's career? So, fortunately, meeting with parents of the athletes and the athletes tend to be a forgiving crew. And when I would put up front the fact that I had crashed and had to recover, and I was X amount of years in recovery, and I did a program, surprisingly, most of the reaction was congratulations. It wasn't judgment. Occasionally, one time I had a father who said, I don't believe there is recovery from alcoholism, and didn't end up going further in that discussion. But in general, we ended up in 2016, we signed a first round quarterback. And then the next year came Patrick Mahomes, and then the year after that, Tua Tagovailoa and Jerry Jeudy. And I wrote a best-selling book in 2014, and I went to about 40 college campuses because I knew I would have to reintroduce myself to a younger generation. I mean, time had passed, and and for that Gen Z, life started right now, today. There's no real history. So I went back to the campuses and I started writing again, a whole series of articles for Forbes, and I started reemerging, and very quickly was asked to comment on different situations on television. I did a radio show, I did a podcast. And so the fact that
big, Lee, you came back with a vengeance. I mean, I think that was so amazing because you didn't hide what you went through. You told families, and you said, if I can do it once, I can do it again. And do you think you're more successful now than you were when you first started out? I mean, I know it's hard to gauge that, but how do you see yourself now, even versus when you first started in this industry?
Well, the relationships are all back. I reunited with the woman of my dreams, and
Ooh.
that's
wait, that's you reunited?
Yes, we had split up earlier, really because of my alcoholism. But after 10 years, she came back, which, if just for that,
wow.
going through the experience, I read two of my kids I was always good with, but I reunited. I never lost touch with some of my old clients, and the acts of kindness that people did, because at that point I had was ailing financially. I was $4.9 million in debt, and a whole series of people in my life helped me out financially, which I paid them back. But I really don't know what people do that don't have strong friendships and family when everything crashes. I have total empathy. I'll never look at a homeless person the same way again, because there, but for the grace of God, go on.
What do you hope, as we wrap up this interview, what do you hope people learn from your story, from your journey? If there were 2 to 3 things that you hope people really take away from all that you went through, from the highs to the lows to losing it almost all to rebuilding? What would that be?
First of all, that this is a universal problem, that it doesn't respect age, race, sex, anything else. It can hit anybody, anywhere in life. Second of all, that you have to break denial to finally confront the fact that you have an overwhelming problem. And once you do that, there's lots of help out there. There are um, 12-step programs with unique fellowships just looking to help you. But you have to take the first step, which is reaching out for help. Then, um, um, as if your life depended on it, because it does, work a program. Break denial, work those 12 steps in order. Find a sponsor who has a sponsor, and then pass it on and be of service to other people, which I hope today uh, does, because the American Addiction Center does terrific work and rebuilds lives, and people can find the help. And no matter how dark it is, you can light candles and not curse the darkness. And if you have resilience, a belief, optimism that things can get better, I guarantee you they will.
Because is your life better than what you imagined when you were in those dark spots?
It's unimaginable. Absolutely. Um, I've got another opportunity to make a difference in the world, to attack basic societal problems through role modeling and athletes, uh, and I've got wonderful people with family and friends around me, and I'm looking for another long run here.
I love that. You said you're looking for another long run. So my final question for you, Lee, is what is next for you? I mean, you've done it all. I mean, you've had a movie based on your life. You're the comeback person who's, gone through the odds, but shown that with resilience, you can overcome. So what's next? What's on your agenda? What do you even have left? I know you said you have a long run ahead of you. So I want to pick your brain to see what we can expect.
So one time I developed a program that pushed back on hate groups and created people to fight against supremacists and racists and anti-Semites, and we trained about 8,000 people to be the fight against hate. I want to do that again, because without racial harmony and the ability for people to live together, I don't know where we are. I have a thing called the Sporting Green Alliance, which takes sustainable technology and in all the different areas to drop carbon emissions and energy costs. So I'm working along on that. I've explored different healing modalities: hyperbaric oxygen, stem cell, red, white, and blue light, nanoV, and some cognitive processes that do that. So I'd like to continue to keep a hand in the representation of athletes, but work on projects. I'm halfway through the next book I'm writing, and I have another
Tell us the name.
It would be called Comeback. and
Love that.
It would be called Comeback. And I also have another book project, which is Parenting Youth Athletes, which shows you how to raise your kids that are approaching youth soccer. No one gives you a driver's license to raise them. Are they supposed to win at all costs, or is participation the key? So I want to change the culture of youth sports so we have parents understanding kids' point of view and kids staying with it longer. So just a couple things like that.
Just a couple things. That's wow. And I'm just so glad and thankful, first of all, that you shared your story with us. But I can only imagine how much we would have missed out had you not found that resilience, had that moment on your dad's bed where you said, I can do this. I'm going to keep trying. And to see where you are today and the impact that you're making on the world and the impact you're going to make is phenomenal. So thank you for sharing your journey with us. And do you have any final parting words?
Well, just thank you, Joy, for the fact that you've got this platform with American Addiction Centers where you are helping people every day.
Yes, it makes a difference because there's so many people out there struggling. And I love what you said is you would never judge a homeless person again because you never know what anyone else is going through.
Right.
And as you said, it could always be me. So such good insight tonight. And thank you all for joining us for another edition of Addiction Talk. Good night.